Hyde's design was brutally minimalist, 23 parts total. No screws, no springs except the firing pin spring, no magazine, no clip, no extraction mechanism, nothing complicated, nothing that required skilled assembly. The barrel, smooth-bore steel tube. No rifling. Rifling requires machining. Machining requires time. Smoothbore meant inaccurate beyond 10 feet. Acceptable. The weapon was designed for point-blank use, contact range, muzzle against target. At that range, accuracy didn't matter. The receiver, stamped steel, single piece, bent into shape, welded at one seam, standard automotive manufacturing technique. Every automobile plant in America could make it. The breech, simple plug, rotates to open, insert round, rotate to close, fire, rotate to open, push spent casing out with wooden dowel, reload. The trigger, stamped metal lever, pulls firing pin back against spring tension, release trigger, spring drives pin forward, pin hits primer, round fires, the grip, cast metal, rough, uncomfortable, barely large enough for adult hand, no ergonomics, no comfort, just function. The sights, stamped metal, fixed, non-adjustable, optimistic beyond 5 yards, useless beyond 10. The weapon had no safety. Cocked firing pin was live. Drop the weapon, might fire. Bump the trigger, might fire. Carry it loaded, risk accidental discharge. Safety wasn't priority. Effectiveness was priority. The Liberator was meant to be used once, maybe twice, then discarded. Disposable weapon. Use it, lose it, get a real gun. That was the concept. That was the philosophy. That was why it could be so simple. Didn't need to last, didn't need to be reliable long term, just needed to work once. One shot, one kill, one captured weapon, mission accomplished. Somewhere in occupied France, July 1944, a French resistance fighter named Pierre Dubois finds a metal canister in a field outside Lyon, parachuted, dropped by Allied aircraft. The canister is sealed, waterproof, olive drab. He opens it. Inside, a pistol. The strangest pistol he's ever seen. 4 inches long, barrel smooth, no rifling, simple metal tube, single shot, no magazine, no clip, just one round, loaded through the breech, ejected manually with a wooden dowel. The pistol comes with 10 rounds, 10 bullets, 45 caliber, heavy rounds, powerful rounds, meant for close range, meant for one purpose: kill an enemy soldier, take his weapon. That's the theory. The weapon is called the Liberator, FP-45, flare projector 45 caliber. Deceptive name. Not a flare projector, a pistol, a single-shot assassination weapon. Cost to manufacture, $2.40. Production time, 11 seconds. 1 million units produced. 1 million cheap pistols meant to arm resistance fighters across Europe, meant to turn civilians into guerrillas, meant to enable uprisings, meant to liberate occupied territories. Dubois examines the weapon, weighs maybe 1 pound, all steel, stamped metal, crude finish, sharp edges, uncomfortable grip, simple sights, no safety, just a trigger and a firing pin. Instructions are printed on the packaging. Comic strip format. No words, just pictures. Load, aim, fire, extract, reload. Universal instructions. Understandable regardless of language. Designed for anyone. Trained or untrained. Soldier or civilian. Adult or teenager. The Liberator doesn't require training. Doesn't require skill. Requires only desperation. Requires only willingness to kill at point-blank range. Requires only courage to approach an enemy close enough to guarantee a hit. Dubois loads 1 round, feels the weapon's weight, imagines using it, imagines approaching a German soldier, imagines pulling the trigger at arm's length, imagines the German's weapon becoming his weapon. The theory is brilliant. The practice will prove different. The Liberator will be one of World War II's most spectacular failures, not because the weapon doesn't work. It works, but because almost nobody uses it. 1 million manufactured, maybe a few thousand ever fired in combat, maybe a few hundred actually killed enemy soldiers. The rest sit in storage, sit in warehouses, sit forgotten until war ends and someone asks, what do we do with 1 million unused pistols? The Liberator concept emerged in early 1942. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency, studied resistance movements, studied partisan warfare, studied how to arm civilians in occupied territories. The problem: conventional weapons were expensive, heavy, complex, required training, required maintenance, required ammunition supply chains, couldn't be airdropped in large quantities, couldn't be distributed secretly, couldn't arm untrained civilians effectively. The OSS wanted something different, something cheap, something simple, something expendable, something that turned civilians into combatants with minimal investment. The answer: a single-shot pistol, one bullet, one trigger pull, one purpose. The concept went to General Motors, Guide Lamp Division, the division that made automobile headlights, not weapons, not guns, headlights. But Guide Lamp had metal stamping capability, had assembly lines, had mass production expertise, could make millions of small metal devices. The OSS gave them specifications: single-shot pistol, .45 caliber, smoothbore, no rifling, minimal parts, maximum simplicity, production cost under $5. Could Guide Lamp do it? Yes. Could they do it for $2.40? Yes. Could they produce 1 million units? Yes. Could they do it in 3 months? Yes. The contract was signed March 1942. Delivery deadline, June 1942. 3 months to design, tool up, and produce 1 million pistols. Impossible by traditional standards, possible with American mass production capability. Guide Lamp assigned the project to their engineering team, led by George Hyde, weapons designer, engineer, pragmatist. He had 10 weeks to design a pistol simple enough to manufacture in 11 seconds. Production began April 1942. Guide Lamp Division converted automobile headlight assembly lines, installed stamping dies, installed welding equipment, trained workers. Assembly line method. Each worker performed one task. One worker stamped barrels, one worker stamped receivers, one worker welded seams, one worker assembled triggers, one worker installed firing pins. Each worker repeated their task. All day, every day. The pistols moved down the line, from raw metal to finished weapon. 11 seconds per unit, not 11 seconds per worker. 11 seconds total. From first stamping operation to final assembly. 5 pistols per minute, 300 per hour, 7,200 per day per line. Multiple lines running, multiple shifts, 24-hour production. By June 1942, 1 million units complete, 1 million Liberators, packaged in cardboard boxes, waxed cardboard, waterproof. Each box contained 1 pistol, 10 rounds of ammunition, 1 wooden dowel for ejection, comic strip instructions. Total package weight, 2 pounds, small enough to fit in a coat pocket, light enough to carry easily, cheap enough to drop by parachute without worrying about recovery. The entire production run cost $2,400,000, $2.4 million for 1 million pistols. Compare, 1 Thompson submachine gun cost $200. 1 M1 Garand rifle cost $85. The Liberator cost less than $3. 12 Liberators for the price of 1 Thompson. 28 Liberators for the price of 1 Garand. The economics seemed brilliant. Arm thousands of resistance fighters for the cost of arming hundreds of soldiers. The theory made sense. The practice would reveal problems. Distribution was the first problem. How do you deliver 1 million pistols to resistance fighters in occupied Europe? Airdrop, parachute containers, RAF bombers flying night missions, drop supplies, weapons, equipment. The Liberators were supposed to be included, supposed to be dropped across France, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, Czechoslovakia. Anywhere resistance movements existed, the reality, almost none were dropped in Europe. Maybe 10,000, maybe 20,000. Numbers remain unclear. Most Liberators went to China, Burma, Philippines, Pacific theater, not European theater. Why? Several reasons. First, resistance movements in Europe didn't want them. French resistance requested real weapons, Sten guns, rifles, explosives, not single-shot pistols, not suicide weapons that required arm's-length assassination. Second, logistics officers didn't want to waste aircraft space. A bomber could carry 500 pounds of supplies. 500 pounds of Liberators meant 250 pistols. 500 pounds of Sten guns meant 20 submachine guns. The submachine guns were obviously more valuable, obviously more effective, obviously better investment of limited cargo space. Third, security concerns. If Germans captured a Liberator, they could identify it, trace it to American production, use it for propaganda, use it to justify reprisals against civilians. The OSS worried about blowback. Fourth, military brass didn't believe in the concept. Generals didn't think single-shot pistols would accomplish anything, didn't think civilians would use them, didn't think the psychological effect justified the cost. They were mostly right. The Liberator was a brilliant idea that didn't translate to battlefield reality. Was psychological warfare weapon that didn't achieve psychological effect. Was cheap solution that solved wrong problem. The European resistance needed sustained firepower, needed automatic weapons, needed explosives, needed support. They didn't need assassination pistols, didn't need suicide missions, didn't need weapons that worked once if you survived using them. China received approximately 500,000 Liberators, half the production run, delivered through India, through Burma Road when possible, airdropped when road was cut. Chinese resistance forces operating behind Japanese lines were supposed to use them, were supposed to assassinate Japanese soldiers, capture better weapons, build insurgency. The Chinese reaction, confusion. Why would Americans send single-shot pistols? Why not real weapons? Why not rifles? Why not ammunition for weapons they already had? Chinese resistance commander Lin Wei, interviewed post-war 1947. The American pistol was insult. We were fighting Japanese army, professional soldiers. We needed real weapons. We received toys, one-shot pistols. We could not fight with these. We could not ambush patrols with these. We could not defend villages with these. We stored them. Hoped Americans would send real weapons later. Some did, most did not. The pistols sat in caves, rusting, unused. The testimony reveals the fundamental problem. The Liberator assumed resistance fighters had no weapons, assumed they needed any weapon, even terrible weapon. The reality, most resistance fighters had some weapons, had old rifles, had captured Japanese weapons, had improvised firearms. The Liberator was worse than what they already had. Single shot versus bolt-action rifle, 4-inch barrel versus 20-inch barrel, smoothbore versus rifled, 10-foot range versus 200-yard range. Why would anyone trade down? Why would anyone choose Liberator over any alternative? They wouldn't. They didn't. The Liberators sat unused. Some were eventually used. Not against Japanese, against nationalist Chinese forces during Chinese Civil War. Post-war, different conflict, different enemy, wrong application. The weapon designed for resistance warfare ended up in civil war, where it was equally useless. The Philippines received approximately 200,000 liberators, delivered to resistance forces fighting Japanese occupation, delivered to guerrillas in mountains, to partisans in jungles, to civilians conducting sabotage. Filipino resistance had mixed reactions. Some units appreciated the weapons, used them occasionally. Most units ignored them, preferred other weapons, preferred weapons that fired more than once. Captain Roberto Santos, Philippine Resistance, Luzon, 1944. We received the American one-shot pistols. Some men used them. Most did not. The pistol required getting very close to Japanese soldier, within touching distance, then firing, then hoping the shot killed, then hoping no other Japanese nearby. Too many hopes, too much risk. We preferred ambush with rifles, preferred explosives, preferred anything that didn't require suicide approach. The pistols stayed in boxes mostly. We appreciated American support, but needed better weapons. The Philippine resistance was sophisticated, organized, experienced. They conducted complex operations, ambushes, raids, sabotage, operations that required planning, coordination, firepower. The Liberator didn't fit those operations, didn't provide sustained fire, didn't provide covering fire, didn't provide anything except one shot at point-blank range, one shot that might work, might not, might get you killed trying. Filipino guerrillas were brave, not suicidal. They wanted weapons that improved their survival odds. The Liberator reduced survival odds, made combat more dangerous, made success less likely. Rational people don't choose worse weapons, don't choose higher risk, don't choose lower effectiveness. The Liberators sat unused, stored, forgotten, until Americans arrived, until Philippines was liberated. Then the Liberators were handed back. Thank you for the weapons. We don't need them anymore. We have real guns now. European deployment was minimal. Maybe 10,000 liberators reached European resistance, maybe 20,000. Documentation is incomplete. What's known, very few were actually used. French resistance received some, stored them, never used them in significant numbers. No major operations, no mass assassinations, no uprising armed with liberators. Polish resistance received some through Soviet channels. Soviets captured liberators from somewhere, passed them to Polish Home Army. The Poles examined them, laughed, set them aside, used captured German weapons instead, used anything except the Liberator. Belgian resistance might have received some. No documentation confirms use. No after-action reports mention them. No veteran accounts describe using them. The weapon designed to arm European resistance barely reached Europe, barely saw use when it did. The closest thing to documented European combat use, a single report from France. June 1944, post-D-Day, a resistance fighter used Liberator to kill a German soldier, took his rifle, used the rifle in subsequent operations, exactly as intended, exactly as designed, one confirmed use, one successful mission, one data point, against 1 million produced. The success rate, 0.001%, 1 in 1 million. That's not a weapon, that's statistical noise, that's failure, complete failure. The Liberator failed in Europe because Europe didn't need it. European resistance was sophisticated, organized, Allied supported. They received Sten guns, received plastic explosives, received radio equipment, received everything except liberators. Because liberators didn't help, didn't improve capabilities, didn't enable operations, just cluttered warehouses with useless metal. German intelligence captured liberators, studied them, analyzed them, tried to understand American thinking. The analysis, from captured German documents. Translation: the American single-shot pistol represents psychological warfare attempt, not practical weapon. Too crude, too limited, too dangerous to user. Intended to create fear among occupation forces. Intended to make every civilian potential assassin. Intended to force increased security measures. Intended to disrupt occupation through paranoia rather than actual resistance. Assessment: minimal threat. Weapon is ineffective. Distribution is limited. Actual use appears negligible. Recommend standard security procedures continue. No special measures required. The German assessment was accurate. The Liberator was more psychological weapon than practical weapon, but the psychological effect failed. German soldiers didn't fear civilians with single-shot pistols, didn't change behavior, didn't increase security, didn't waste resources guarding against threat that didn't materialize. The weapon that was supposed to create fear created nothing, created no effect, created no change, created no impact. 1 million pistols, 0 strategic value, 0 tactical value, 0 psychological value, complete failure across all intended purposes. The Germans were more amused than concerned, found the concept interesting, found the execution laughable, found the whole program evidence of American naivety about warfare, about occupation, about resistance. The Germans had experience occupying countries, had experience fighting resistance, had experience with what worked and what didn't. They knew single-shot pistols didn't work, knew resistance needed sustained firepower, knew the Liberator was desperation weapon that wouldn't change anything. They were right. American military assessment came later, after war ended, after 1 million Liberators sat in warehouses, after the cost was calculated, after the failure was obvious. The Army Ordnance Department studied the program, interviewed OSS personnel, reviewed distribution records, reviewed combat reports, found almost no combat use, found massive waste, found failed concept. The final report, 1946. The FP-45 Liberator pistol program cost $2.4 million, produced 1 million units, distributed approximately 700,000 units. Combat use, minimal. Confirmed kills, unable to verify. Assessment: program failed to achieve objectives. Resistance fighters preferred conventional weapons. Distribution logistics prevented effective deployment. Weapon limitations made combat use impractical. Recommendation: discontinue program. Dispose of remaining inventory. Do not repeat concept in future conflicts. Translation: we wasted $2.4 million on pistols nobody wanted, nobody used, nobody needed. Don't do this again. The report was classification, confidential, not because the information was sensitive, because the failure was embarrassing. American industrial capability produced 1 million weapons. American military couldn't figure out how to use them. American strategy assumed resistance fighters needed whatever they could get. Reality proved resistance fighters were selective, discriminating, rational. They wanted effective weapons. The Liberator wasn't effective, so they didn't use it. Simple as that. The program represented American optimism without American realism, represented production capability without strategic thinking, represented doing something without understanding whether that something mattered. $2.4 million bought nothing except lesson. Cheap weapons that nobody uses aren't cheap. They're expensive failures. Disposal became a problem. 700,000 Liberators distributed, 300,000 still in American warehouses. What to do with 300,000 single-shot pistols? Options considered. First option, keep in storage, for future conflicts, for potential need, rejected. Nobody wanted them in current war. Why keep for future wars? Second option, destroy them, melt down metal, recover materials, Economical, but wasteful, admitting total failure. Third option, sell as surplus, to police forces, to security companies, to anyone who wanted cheap firearms. Problematic, introducing untraceable weapons into civilian population. Fourth option, give them away, to allied nations, to friendly governments, to anyone who would take them. The chosen solution, combination. Some destroyed, some given away. Some ended up in police departments, in security companies, in private collections, the surplus market. Decades later, Liberators became collectibles, historical curiosities, museum pieces, worth more as artifacts than as weapons. Original Liberators in good condition, valuable, more valuable than production cost. Ironic. The weapon worth $2.40 in 1942, worth hundreds in collector market. The weapon nobody wanted during the war became sought after the war, not for function, for history, for novelty, for owning piece of World War II's strangest weapons. Museums acquired examples: Imperial War Museum, Smithsonian, National World War II Museum. Private collectors accumulated dozens, hundreds. Some collectors specialized in Liberators, bought every variant, every packaging variation, every version of instructions, created complete collections of weapon nobody used. The irony wasn't lost on collectors. The weapon designed for mass distribution to resistance fighters ended up in display cases, behind glass, untouched, unused, exactly like they were during the war. Except now people paid to not use them. Then people got paid to not use them. Now people pay to own them. Different century, same uselessness. The comic strip instructions became famous, more famous than the weapon. 10 panels, no words, just pictures. Universal communication. Panel 1, soldier holding weapon. Panel 2, rotate breech plug. Panel 3, insert round. Panel 4, close breech. Panel 5, aim at target. Panel 6, pull trigger. Panel 7, weapon fires. Panel 8, open breech. Panel 9, use dowel to extract casing. Panel 10, repeat. The instructions were brilliant, understandable regardless of language, understandable regardless of literacy, understandable by anyone who could see pictures. The design reflected American diversity, reflected immigrant population, reflected understanding that resistance fighters spoke dozens of languages, couldn't read instructions in English, couldn't read instructions at all sometimes. Pictures solved problem. Pictures transcended language. Pictures worked everywhere. The instructions were field-tested, given to people who spoke no English, watched them follow instructions, successfully load, successfully fire, successfully operate weapon without verbal instruction. The test proved the concept, proved visual communication worked, proved the instructions achieved their purpose. But the instructions couldn't solve the weapon's fundamental problems, couldn't make single-shot pistol into effective combat weapon, couldn't make smoothbore barrel accurate, couldn't make point-blank range safe, couldn't make suicide mission appealing. The instructions perfectly explained how to use a weapon nobody wanted to use. Perfect solution to wrong problem. That summarized the entire Liberator program. Perfect execution of flawed concept. Brilliant tactics serving failed strategy. American industrial efficiency producing useless product. Testing revealed the weapon's limitations. Aberdeen, proving ground, received Liberators. Tested accuracy, tested reliability, tested effectiveness. Accuracy test, 5 yards, man-sized target, 10 shots, 7 hits, 3 misses, at 5 yards, at arm's length plus 1 step. The smoothbore barrel made accuracy terrible. The short barrel length made aim difficult. The crude sights made precision impossible. At 10 yards, 3 hits, 7 misses. At 20 yards, 1 hit, 9 misses. The weapon was designed for contact range. The testing proved it. Beyond touching distance, the Liberator was useless. Reliability test, 100 rounds fired, 2 malfunctions, both extraction failures, spent casing stuck in breech, required force to remove, sometimes damaged firing pin attempting removal. Overall reliability, 98%, acceptable for single-shot weapon, better than expected given crude manufacturing. The steel was adequate, the welding held, the mechanism worked, the weapon functioned, just not effectively. Effectiveness test. This was subjective. How do you measure effectiveness of assassination weapon? How do you test point-blank murder? The testing officer's report. The FP-45 pistol functions as designed, fires .45 caliber ammunition at close range. Accuracy is poor beyond 5 yards. Lethality at contact range is adequate. The weapon achieves its design parameters. Whether those parameters represent useful military capability is questionable. The weapon requires user to approach enemy within arm's reach. Then fire single shot. Then hope shot incapacitates. Then hope no other enemies nearby. These requirements seem optimistic. Actual combat employment appears unlikely to succeed. Translation: the gun works. The concept doesn't. The weapon was tested. The strategy was flawed. No amount of testing fixes bad strategy. Actual combat use stories are rare. Few documented cases exist. Most are apocryphal, unverified. But some accounts survive. Philippine guerrilla, name unknown, post-war account. I used the American pistol once. Japanese patrol came through village. I hid, waited. One soldier separated from group, looked in houses. I waited until he entered house where I hid. Approached from behind, fired into his back. He fell. I took his rifle. I took his ammunition. I left the pistol. Never used it again. Didn't need to. Had rifle now. That's what the pistol was for, getting better weapon. It worked, but only because I was lucky. If he had turned, if others had been close, if my shot had missed, I would be dead. The pistol was last resort. Desperation weapon, not first choice, not safe choice, last choice when no other options existed. The account reveals the Liberator's actual role, not primary weapon, not preferred weapon, last resort weapon. When everything else failed, when no other options existed, when desperation justified risk. How often did those conditions occur? Rarely. Most resistance fighters had other options. Had other weapons, had better weapons, didn't need last resort. The Liberator sat unused because last resort rarely came. Chinese resistance fighter, name unknown, post-war interview. We never used the American one-shot pistol, kept it hidden, too dangerous, too limited. We had other weapons, old rifles, captured Japanese weapons, homemade explosives, all better than one-shot pistol. The pistol was curiosity, American gift we didn't need. We appreciated thought, but preferred useful weapons. The pattern repeats. Appreciation without use, gratitude without application. Thanks, but no thanks. The weapon that was supposed to arm resistance couldn't compete with alternatives, couldn't provide what fighters needed, couldn't justify its existence. Cost-benefit analysis reveals the failure's scale. $2.4 million spent, 1 million pistols produced, maybe 5,000 used in combat. Generous estimate, probably lower. 2.4 million divided by 5,000, $480 per combat use. $480 per single shot fired at enemy. Compare, a Thompson submachine gun costs $200, fires 600 rounds. Cost per shot, 33 cents. A Liberator costs $2.40, fires 1 shot. Cost per shot, $480 when adjusted for actual use rate. The Liberator was cheapest weapon to produce. Most expensive weapon per combat use. The economics failed completely. The concept of cheap weapons arming masses failed, because cheap weapons nobody uses aren't cheap. They're expensive failures. Alternative uses of $2.4 million, 11,000 Thompson submachine guns, 28,000 M1 Garand rifles, 8 million rounds of ammunition, 200,000 hand grenades. Any of those would have armed resistance more effectively, would have provided sustained firepower, would have enabled operations, would have been used. The Liberator represented American thinking about resistance warfare, optimistic, idealistic, disconnected from reality. Assumed resistance fighters needed any weapon, assumed single-shot capability was better than nothing, assumed cheap was better than effective. All assumptions wrong. All assumptions proven wrong. All assumptions costing $2.4 million to disprove. The psychological warfare aspect failed completely. The Liberator was supposed to create fear, supposed to make occupation forces paranoid, supposed to force security measures, supposed to waste enemy resources guarding against civilian assassins. None of that happened. German occupation forces didn't change procedures, didn't increase security, didn't fear civilians with liberators. Why would they? The weapon required point-blank approach, required perfect circumstances, required incredible courage or desperation. Most civilians weren't assassins. Most civilians wanted to survive. Most civilians wouldn't risk family for one German soldier's rifle. The Germans understood this, understood human nature, understood that normal people don't commit suicide missions. The resistance fighters who would commit such missions already had weapons, had support, had organization, didn't need liberators. The gap between those willing to fight and those needing liberators was empty. Nobody existed in that gap. The weapon designed for that gap armed nobody, changed nothing, accomplished nothing. American psychological warfare planners learned lesson. Psychology requires understanding target, understanding what creates fear, understanding what changes behavior. A weapon that nobody believes will be used doesn't create fear, doesn't change behavior, doesn't accomplish anything. The Liberator was theoretical fear, theoretical threat, theoretical psychological weapon. Reality proved theory wrong, as usual. Post-war analysis by military historians provides perspective. The Liberator represented American approach to resistance warfare, industrial approach, mass production approach, quantity over quality approach, build millions of cheap weapons, distribute widely, hope some get used. The approach worked for tanks, worked for aircraft, worked for ships, didn't work for resistance weapons. Resistance warfare required different thinking, required understanding local conditions, required supporting existing organizations, required providing what resistance needed, not what Americans thought resistance needed. The British understood this better. British Special Operations Executive, SOE, armed resistance with Sten guns, simple submachine guns, cheap, effective, sustained fire, could be used in combat, could enable operations. Resistance fighters wanted them, used them, fought with them. The Sten cost $15 to produce, 6 times more than Liberator, but actually used, actually effective, actually worth the investment. Quality over quantity when users are selective. British also provided explosives, training, radio equipment, intelligence support, complete support package, not just weapons, everything needed for effective resistance. The Americans provided liberators, single-shot pistols, no support, no training, no integration, just cheap weapons dropped from aircraft. The difference in approaches explained difference in results. British-supported resistance was effective. American Liberator program was not. The lesson: Resistance warfare requires more than cheap weapons, requires understanding, requires support, requires providing what's actually needed, not what's cheap to produce. Modern collectors treasure Liberators. Original examples sell for $500 to $1,000, 20 to 40 times production cost. More for rare variants, more for examples with original packaging, more for UN-issued specimens. The irony: the weapon worth nothing in 1944 worth hundreds now. Worth more as historical artifact than as weapon. Worth more unused than used. Collectors appreciate the concept, appreciate the engineering, appreciate the historical significance, appreciate owning piece of failed program. The failure makes it interesting. Success would make it common. Failure makes it rare, makes it collectible, makes it valuable. Museums display Liberators prominently. Explain the concept, explain the production, explain the failure. The weapon teaches lessons about war, about resistance, about good intentions without good execution, about American optimism meeting battlefield reality. The displays usually include the comic strip instructions. The instructions are more interesting than the weapon, represent better thinking than the weapon represents, represent successful communication even if the thing being communicated was useless. Visitors examine the Liberator. Pick it up sometimes, feel the weight, imagine using it, imagine approaching enemy soldier, imagine firing single shot, imagine hoping that shot works, imagine the courage required, imagine the desperation required. Most visitors conclude they wouldn't use it, wouldn't risk life for one shot, wouldn't trade safety for single chance. Same conclusion resistance fighters reached, same conclusion that made the weapon fail. The Liberator sits in museums teaching lesson. Cheap solutions to complex problems usually fail. Good intentions don't guarantee good results. Production capability doesn't equal strategic success. Sometimes the answer isn't building more, sometimes the answer is building better. Sometimes the answer is understanding what people actually need instead of assuming what they need. The legacy extends beyond the weapon itself. The Liberator influenced thinking about resistance warfare, about supporting insurgencies, about providing weapons to non-conventional forces. The lessons learned shaped future programs. Vietnam War. American support to South Vietnamese forces included proper weapons, M16 rifles, M60 machine guns, mortars, not single-shot pistols, not desperation weapons, actual military hardware. Afghanistan, 1980s. CIA support to Mujahideen included Stinger missiles, AK-47s, heavy weapons, everything needed for effective resistance, not cheap substitutes, not last resort weapons, effective tools. The pattern shows learning, shows understanding that resistance fighters are soldiers, need soldier weapons, need soldier support, not civilian improvisations. The Liberator represented old thinking, pre-Vietnam thinking, thinking that resistance fighters were desperate amateurs needing anything. Post-Vietnam understanding, resistance fighters are professionals, need professional tools. The change in thinking came from Liberator's failure, from learning that cheap doesn't work, that desperation weapons don't arm victory. That resistance deserves same support as regular forces. The 1 million Liberators that nobody used taught that lesson. Expensive lesson, $2.4 million lesson, but valuable lesson. Lesson that saved lives in later conflicts, saved American resources in later programs, saved American credibility by not repeating mistake. Maybe the Liberator's failure was worth the cost, worth it for lessons learned, worth it for preventing bigger failures, worth it for understanding that supporting resistance requires more than cheap weapons dropped from sky, requires commitment, requires understanding, requires providing what's actually needed.